Tonight, the first college football playoff rankings will come out. And I wrote another blog you should read. That's on my website, thekohlershow.com. This is the perfect year for a college football playoff expansion. In the past, there have been teams highly ranked that put out 20 draft picks in a year. Like last year's Georgia team, that was an all-time defense. Nobody really stood a chance. Alabama did beat them once, but once Jamison Williams went down, they couldn't keep up. The 2020 Alabama Crimson Tide, that team was loaded in a COVID year where everything was weird. The 2019 LSU team had, previous to last year's Georgia team, the most draft picks by a single team. They had one of the best offense probably in NFL or college football history. Joe Burrow had an amazing season. Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson are two of the best receivers in the NFL now, and they were on the same team. These teams were loaded, and that seems to be the biggest argument for why the playoff shouldn't expand is, one team's just going to win it all. Anyways, the top team always is just going to win it all, and that's just not true. And also that's another loser way of looking at things. It's like, why should we play the other couple months, the other 13 games of the season if we know that Alabama or Georgia or Ohio State's just going to win every year? Why don't we just do a 4-team playoff, Ohio State, Georgia, Tennessee, and we'll do Clemson? Ohio State, Georgia, Clemson, Alabama. Sorry, I think I threw Tennessee in there. But yeah, why don't we just do that? We'll just have a 4-team playoff. We'll start it in the last week of August, and then we'll have our playoff champion by the first week of September, and then we can all just enjoy Halloween. But that's logically not why you should do it. And college football has never been able to get this right. Growing up, first season I fully remember watching was the 2003 season. So this was the BCS. I grew up with the BCS system, which such a crazy thought to me that the NCAA came up with computers choosing who should play for the national championship, even though there might be other. It happened the first year with Nebraska and Michigan, where there were two teams that won. They split the national title. So like year one, they should have known, like, hey, this still isn't going to decide the national champion. And they did it anyway. So then they opted to go to a 4-team playoff. And even that still, like, there's the biggest argument every year is what is that last team that should get in? 4 seeds have won before. So, it's not crazy to think that if we expand this thing that other teams couldn't upset the number 1 ranked team. Why are we just saying the number 1 ranked team should win every year if the 4 seed or the 3 seed or the 2 seed wins too? And also it's not really fair to, and I hate to be this guy, but it's not really fair to the kids that play the whole season and then they're like, you're the 5 seed and you miss the playoff even if you're an undefeated team. I go through it more in depth in the blog, but I believe it was Ohio State one year was left out for Notre Dame, and Notre Dame got squashed, and Ohio State probably would have been the better option. But we'll never know. So here, let's look at this year, the rankings. So right now we got Georgia, Tennessee, Ohio State, Michigan, the top 4. I would put Michigan above Ohio State personally. No reason. There's no bias there, but Georgia and Tennessee play each other this week. That'll be an interesting game. It'll be Tennessee actually playing a good defense here. I would have Alabama ranked above Clemson. Clemson hasn't looked overly impressive, but Clemson's undefeated. TCU's undefeated, and they've played a much tougher Big 12 schedule than than Clemson. So I would have TCU above Clemson. So I would have Georgia, Tennessee, Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, TCU, Clemson. That's 7 teams. You got Oregon, who after getting squashed by Georgia in week 1 looks pretty good. USC, who can't play defense but can score with anyone. UCLA and Utah. Those are both good teams that run the ball, and UCLA has a senior quarterback. Utah has a senior quarterback. UCLA runs the ball well. They play defense. They have a big receiver in Bobo. I mean, Utah's got Kincaid over there. Ole Miss runs the ball really well. They lost to LSU, and I believe they play Alabama still. And then you got teams like K-State, LSU. We don't really know what they are. Oklahoma State just got squashed. But, yeah, we got 12 teams here that, you could realistically say could beat each other. Georgia almost lost to Kent State and Missouri. They kind of struggled against Florida, who can't throw the ball really, but kind of threw the ball on Georgia. So, Tennessee looks really good right now. They don't play great defense. They've been in a lot of close games. Now they have to play a game on the road. We'll see how they do this weekend. Ohio State has definitely looked beatable. Ohio State they have struggled against now Notre Dame, the first half against Iowa, and the first, 54 minutes of the Penn State game until they exploded for 4 touchdowns in like 2 minutes. But the offense gets off to slow starts, and they can't really run. Like everybody, a couple of weeks ago, I heard like how good their offensive line was at blocking, but that seems to be their biggest weakness, and I don't know why people didn't realize that earlier. I've been pointing it out. Ohio State, yeah, they can score fast, and they have players on offense that can score fast, but their defense is not it's not impenetrable. You can run against their defense. I believe if Penn State would have ran more, they could have milked more clock, and they wouldn't have been in such a shitty situation as they were. Also, Clifford, the 5-year starter there at Penn State, just throwing picks left and right, and their first 2 drives were picks, or was it a pick and a fumble? Something like that. Anyways, they should go with Drew Lar for the rest of the year. I think you need to give him a shot, even though Clifford, it's kind of like a respect thing. But for the program, Drew Lar is going to be a much better quarterback. Clifford makes way too many mistakes. But if they would have kept running the ball, despite those mistakes, they were in the game late. Now Ohio State got a pick 6, and they got the ball back and scored, and they scored. And Penn State they covered, so that was cool. So, yeah, that's Ohio State does look beatable. They look like they might not be this unstoppable team that everybody makes them out to be. They have good receivers. They have a quarterback that can throw to them when they're open. But they've been in bad situations. Iowa is probably the worst offense a Power 5 team has ever had. They look awful. And they were in the game halfway through the third quarter just because their defense was stopping Ohio State. Now they exploded. Again, they exploded. But, Michigan there, they had a close game against Maryland, a 1-score game where Maryland scored on, the last possession in the final minutes, which, that should have been a 15-point game. I believe they went for 2 there. Iowa scored on the last possession of that game to kind of, make it kind of look closer, even though I believe they still won by 20. Michigan State, they just beat down Penn State. That game was not even close. Penn State had 3 plays in that game that were their 3 scores. And then other than that, they were just absolutely just demolished by Michigan. Michigan is kind of built completely to beat Ohio State. And I know I'm hyping myself up and I'm getting myself ready to be hurt. I'm not saying this will be an easy game in Columbus, November 26th. What I am saying is this team, if there was a team to beat Ohio State, is the team. They run the ball. They get after the quarterback. They keep the big plays in front of them. Now, they had a few issues with Keon Coleman, Michigan State's receiver, in the first half, just throwing jump balls to him, and he was coming down with them, and he's a big, athletic, 6'4" basketball player. But they shut him down in the second half. They had -1 receiving yards between Coleman and Reed in the second half. So if they can get past that, if they can kind of get up and just do what they did last year to Ohio State, where they run the ball and run the ball and run the ball and then hit a few big passes, which I think they are more equipped to do this year than they were last year. And they haven't shown a lot of their offense. It's been a lot of simple stuff because they haven't really been in a tough situation. They've kind of, I mean, they've been in a few where like, oh, they're like tied with Indiana and then they pull away. And Maryland looks kind of good, but they were up already because of that first opening kickoff where the guy fumbles and kept it up. Iowa was kind of in there for a while, and they came out in the second half. So Michigan makes the adjustments. They play the right type of defense and offense to beat Ohio State, and everybody is already writing them off. I don't know why. Everybody's already pretty much just putting Ohio State in automatically. Now, Alabama, we'll see. Again, they're going to play Georgia or Tennessee in the SEC championship, pending any losses. But, I mean, they can win out, and that would be a playoff team. Clemson is an undefeated, going to be the ACC championship. They should be a playoff team. TCU, I think, still has a few games. I believe they play Texas this week. That'll be a tough one. We'll see if they get through it. I believe it is a home game. But if they win out, they win the Big 12, why should they not be in the game? Oregon, besides one bad week, the first week of the season, has looked great. They've cost me money. Why are they not a playoff team, especially if they win the Pac-12, which UCLA, USC, and Utah are all there in the top 12 as well? If they went out there, why should they not be in the playoff? So there's and then the other argument is, well, they're always just going to argue about the last team in. Okay, maybe. Yeah, that's what happens. But do they not do that in March Madness too, which is like 64 teams, 68 teams? They do the last four in, first four out, next four out. Do they not do that? But isn't it much easier to say, St. Bonaventure didn't make it in this year because of the strength of schedule, and we're going to put Texas A&M in instead of them? Isn't that much easier than saying, yeah, the undefeated Clemson team can't go to the playoff because they only beat Wake Forest in overtime? What? Like the team that won the ACC or the Pac-12 or the Big 12, 3 of the 5 power conferences can't make it because they weren't Michigan and Ohio State and play each other, or they weren't Tennessee and Georgia and Alabama who play each other. I mean, we're in a situation where we could be looking at Georgia, Tennessee, and the winner of Michigan, Ohio State, possibly in the college football playoff. If people have their way, like let's say, what would it have to be? Georgia beats Tennessee, and then Alabama beats, or it would be Tennessee beating Georgia, and then Alabama beating Tennessee, and the SEC championship. And then I could see 3 SEC teams facing the winner of the Michigan-Ohio State game, which is absolutely ridiculous. It's so stupid. And another argument, there's an argument that the games would mean less if more teams make it in, and which logically doesn't make sense, because if you have 12 teams playing, if you're playing for 12 spots, that means more teams are playing for spots, which means more games mean more. It doesn't make any sense why if we keep it the way it is, 8-1, 7-1, 7-1, 7-1. If we keep it the way it is, essentially Oregon, USC, UCLA, and Ole Miss, who all have one loss, aren't playing for anything right now. Who are all really good teams, aren't really playing for anything. And then Clemson, Alabama, and TCU are playing to maybe get in, even though they could all go undefeated the rest of the. I mean, Alabama's got one loss and a last-second field goal to Tennessee at Tennessee, and like an all-time college football night game, like one of the best games of all time that I was at a wedding for. But I don't know how you can argue against. There's literally nothing. What else do I have written down here? Last spot's always going to be controversial. The games would mean less, which is so stupid. The games would mean more. Less players would be sitting out. If you're in the playoff, your players aren't going to be sitting out. That's why they sit out, is when you're out of the playoff. So we have good players playing for longer. Um, it's going to be more. There's going to be more big games. More games are going to be more if teams at the end of the line are playing to get in. Like, let's say going down the line, we have an Ole Miss playing a Alabama team, and they're playing to get in the playoff. Would that game not mean more than Ole Miss team that knows they're not going to get in the playoff playing a Bama team that's fighting to get in the playoff? Yes. Thank you. It would be more revenue. Obviously, the 12-team playoff would play out the ass, both to the schools and to the NCAA, which I'm not a big corporation guy, but that's a positive. And then this would be some way to even out the recruiting. A lot. I'm big in recruiting. I pay attention to it a lot. Basically, Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, Texas A&M now. Look at where they are. These teams all the past couple of years, or some of them more than the past couple of years, some of them just the past couple of years, have these monster recruiting classes, which are far and above the other teams. And, I mean, there's different ways to recruit. Michigan, I know, doesn't necessarily go after, like, these big fish. They get one or two a class, and then they get a bunch of guys that they know they can develop, which leads to less players transferring, which is why they don't have that big of an issue with players transferring. I don't think they make false promises. I think with teams like Texas A&M, you're going to see a lot of false promises, guys leaving because they're not playing, because they suck, not bought into the program. So there's different ways of doing this. But if you're a recruit and you're thinking, oh, well, Georgia, Bama, Ohio State, Clemson, these are the teams that are going to make it to the playoff, where I'm going to get the most exposure, where I'm going to be playing the biggest games, and that's going to help my draft stock the most. That's where I should go. Those are the teams that put the most players in the NFL. Why should I not go there? But now if you get into more of these other schools, it gives them a chance in the recruiting field to say, hey, well, 12-team playoff, we get a good recruiting class going, we can get a team that could shock the world. You know, it'll be one of those things, and we're going to see with the transfer portal now with guys leaving their school after realizing they're not going to play. Now, it's both a good and a bad thing because, I mean, it's tough as a coach, but it's good for the players because you can go somewhere where you're going to play and you have more talent spread out throughout the country instead of the Alabama running back room that they were talking about with, like, Derrick Henry, T.J. Yeldon, Alvin Kamara. I don't think Najee Harris, but there was one other guy. They have these rooms with just stacked NFL players because all these top recruits go there, and I think this will even it out, and the transfer portal will even it out. So, with that being said, my college football playoff this year would be, we'll just say Georgia, Tennessee, Michigan, and Ohio State. That's where we're at. It's not going to be that because there's still more games to be played, and we don't know where we're going to be at the end, but we got an exciting final month of college football coming up. And, yeah, that's